All right, it's week 2, it's Thursday. We're going to learn some more cool Android stuff. Like, I guess you guys just had your first section. So, the sections are new to the course. We never had them before, partly because we just hadn't had the time to build them. And also we didn't have staff that was, familiar with running sections and helping in that way. So now, we are adding them to the course. So, we do want your feedback on them as we go along. I think we're going to make like a feedback form where you can tell us kind of how section went or any advice, any suggestions that you have. I think, it's important to have the right mindset about section. Like basically we're going to come up with some exercises for you guys to work on each week. And just, you come in and sit you down and you boot up your Android Studio and then you work on them. And I think the goal is not particularly to finish. I mean, if any of you went home after section and tried to finish the exercise, you don't need to do that if you don't want to. I think it's just about like sort of a setting where we're all working on it and we're all practicing it, because I think that maybe what you even see after you went to a section, or maybe when you went to work on the homework, like you don't really learn a lot of this by watching me do it, right? Like I like presenting to you, I like giving these lectures, and I hope that I do okay job of explaining everything to you, but I really think you got to do it. You got to go and practice this stuff to really learn it. So that's kind of what the section is for, to sort of make you do it a little bit more often. So again, like I don't want section to be at all stressful for you. I just want you to feel like I'll show up and I'll work on something for a while. Doesn't matter how far I get, doesn't matter if it works or if it crashes or if it compiles. As long as I'm trying and working on it, then I'm fine. So that's kind of how I want you to think of it. And yeah, the CAs and I will continue trying to work on those documents and make sure that the exercises are fun to work on and stuff like that. Okay. So last time we talked about lists. And I want to go back to that a little bit more today. And I also want to teach you today how to write an app that reads data from a file. So that's the plan. And then after today's lecture, homework 2 is going to go up. It's not up yet. It will be up either later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. And you can take a look at it. Homework 2 and most of the rest of the assignments in the course, you will be allowed to work with a partner in a pair if you want to. So if you have a buddy in mind or something, you can pair up with that person on homework 2. If you don't have a buddy or you don't know who you want to work with, you might consider posting a message on the class Piazza board. If you're looking for a partner, post there, and maybe someone else will look and see it. You can meet up. Or if you want, you can awkwardly hang out here after class and see if anyone wants to talk to you. But I realize that would require you to interact with other human beings, so I don't want to force you to do that if you don't want to do that. Standard disclaimers about working in pairs. I mean, I'm not going to try to enforce some sort of way that you would work together with the other person. The fear whenever you're a teacher and you let students work in groups is you're worried that, well, what if somebody does all the work and the other person doesn't do any work? Well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm not going to follow you to your dorm and watch you working. I'm not going to make you prove to me that you each did half the work. But I don't know why you're taking this class if you wouldn't want to do any of the work. It doesn't seem like much point to that. So I'm assuming that the two of you are going to work together. My general advice for working in pairs, maybe it's obvious, but I'll say it anyway. I think it works better if you actually physically get together and sit together and work together some of the time, if not all of the time, on these projects. I think if you sort of each go to your dorms and you work on this part and I'll work on that part, or even worse, like you do homework 2 and I'll do homework 3. I know some people are probably going to do that. I don't really want you to do that. I don't think that's the most effective way to do it. I mean, I think the more of the material that you aren't working on, the more you're going to be lost later on some other thing we try to do that builds on that earlier material. So I think just get together and code it together and then swap who's on the keyboard every so many minutes and just talk to each other while you're coding it. I don't know, that's how I would do it, but it's up to you. I'm not going to go out of my way to try to make these assignments in such a way that they nicely decompose into you do this half and I'll do that half, or you work on the front end, I'll work on the... I'm not going to think about it that way. I'm just going to try to come up with an exercise to test the material, and if you want to work on it alone or if you want to work on it with a buddy, that's your call, I'm also not going to ask different expectations for a pair. If you have a partner, I'm not going to make you do more features than if you don't have a partner. It's just up to you, because I know some people just get more out of it when they work with somebody else. Anyway, those are my thoughts on pairs. And homework 2 is not up yet. It will go up just later on today. It's going to test the stuff we've been learning, like lists and files and stuff like that. So, okay, let's go back to lists for a minute. We talked about how to make a list, And there were some things about lists that were a little strange. Like one thing that's strange about lists is if you want to specify the items that are in a list, you have to say, well, the entries of the list come from this array. And the array itself is put in a totally separate file called strings.xml. So I showed you how to do that. You need to go to where? This file here called strings.xml. You write in a string array of the items, and then now back in your layout file you can refer to that array by its name, okay? Well, that's if you're doing something called a static list, where you know all the contents of the list ahead of time. You know what's going to be in the list and it's not going to change. So I think in my example that I did last time, it was the list of the names of the Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I already know the names and I know the names aren't changing, so I just do this. Now it's a little different if your list is dynamic or comes from some external place. So I want to talk about that with you guys today. Okay? So where is that? Where is that? Where is that? Where is that? Here. Okay. If you want to do a dynamic list, and I have to apologize on behalf of Android, because this is one of the many places where I just don't think they designed this very well. If you want to do a dynamic list that might change over time or that might come from an external source, you have to use an object called an adapter. An adapter is basically something that maps from a list of data, maybe like an array list or a vector or something like that, over to this ListView widget on the screen. It's kind of a bridge between what you think of as the data itself and the GUI visualization of that data. Sometimes when you talk about data versus visualization, we call that like a model view separation. So in general, model view separation is a good thing, but I don't know if I like this design. So you have to make an object called an adapter. You have to tell the adapter what data that you want to show in your list, and then you have to give that adapter to your list as a property, and then it'll appear on the screen. So I wanted to walk through this with you guys, but in order to do that, I want to do a new project with you, and I want to do like a vocabulary builder thing or a dictionary thing where it's going to try to help you with your vocabulary by, maybe it has a dictionary of words and their definitions, and it'll pick some words and it'll show them on the screen, or it'll pick a word and it'll pick some definitions and it'll show you the definitions, and you have to pick the one that's right. And maybe it helps you practice your vocab building. You're studying for the GRE or something like that, okay? So to get started on that, I've got a project open called Dictionary. I guess it's not really the right name. I should have called it Vocab Quiz or something, but I want the sort of signature parts of this to be a list along with a few other widgets. So if I make a list view here, so wait, maybe let's see. Let's make a text view at the top. Wait, what happened here? Text view at the top, and this might say something like, vocab builder game, exclamation. And so I didn't do this ahead of time. I just thought we'd kind of whip it together ourselves, see how fast we can do it. Here and here and up here. And so I think what I want, let me make this a little bigger font. Let's do 30 SP. Is that too big? Why is it like that? Come on, don't be like that. Okay. It says the height is 11 dp. I think it should just wrap the content. I think there we go. Okay, so what I want this to do is I want to read from a file full of words and then randomly pick one. Say, hey, what's the definition for adjudicate or whatever word? And then I'll have the correct definition of that word, but I'll have some wrong ones in there too, and I'll present them and I'll say pick the right definition. It's multiple choice or something like that, okay? Vocab quiz game. So I'm picturing like there's a text view here that says what word we're trying to guess. So maybe this will say like word. And why is this so small? Can you scroll it up? Okay, you can. If you control plus mouse wheel, it zooms in a little bit. That's helpful. So like maybe I'll have this word here that you're trying to guess. If I want a little bit of separation between the word and this thing up here, do you remember how to separate these? What's that? Yeah, it's a margin. So is that this one? If I say like 30. Yeah, margin of 30. Okay, so separate this a little. So I want to randomly pick some word, and then down here, I want there to be a list of possible definitions for that word. Okay? So, you go over here, and you go over here, and how do I get to the bottom? That's the thing I never understood about this, is like, if it's so big, how do I get down there so I can see the bottom to drag it and drop it? I don't know, that's why I sometimes just drop to the text here, the text view, and say, hey, list view, your constraint, I want the bottom of you to be attached to the bottom of the parent. So, does that work? Can't see it. Okay, whatever. So I think it's mostly set up. Why does this look wrong?
Because the height is fixed at 715.
Oh, did I set a fixed height here? See, that's the thing. When I drag this stuff around, it starts messing with it. So yeah, let's do layout width match the constraints, and then layout height match the constraints. There we go. Thanks, I appreciate that. So I think, anyway, it looks like it's okay. So the contents of this thing are going to be dynamic. They're going to come from a file or something like that. So, okay, let's talk about that. I don't know how to read files yet, but basically let's just generally talk about how do you do the contents of the list in Kotlin, because as opposed to putting them in those XML files. So the first thing you want to do, if you want to talk to any widget in the Kotlin code, how do you make it easier to talk to a widget? What's the mechanism you communicate with widgets in Kotlin code?
ID.
The ID is important, right? So let's give this, it gives it an automatic ID of underscore dynamic. I don't know why. Let's call it definitions list. I don't know, it's a list of possible definitions. Let's give this a name here, this thing that says word. Let's call this the word. Okay, fine. So now, imagine in the Kotlin code here, we're going to be doing some stuff when the app first gets created. So I think I want to get to the point where I'm randomly choosing words from files or whatever, but I don't think I need that. I think maybe I could just, randomly make like an array and pick elements from that or something like that. I kind of want to get to the file afterward. I want to focus on the things we already know about. So if I want to change what the word is on the screen, I could say like the word.text equals, hello, and then hello would appear in that part of the that text view, right? But I don't want it to be hello. I sort of want to randomly pick from a set of choices. Well, so let's just make like an array list and randomly pick one of its elements. And then we could, when we use a file later, I think that code will mostly be reusable, right? So how do you make an array list? Okay, there's a couple ways you can do it. If you know Java, which I think a lot of you guys have seen in 106A or something like that, Java has this class called ArrayList that you can store data in. Now you can use that in Kotlin. You can say like val list equals array list of strings, and then did it already work? I thought I would need to import that. I guess I don't. And then you can say like list.add, hello, and you can say list.add goodbye. You could do this kind of stuff. List.add Marty. And then if you want to pick a random element from the list, you can make a random number generator. You can say val rand equals random number generator, import that. And then you can say val index equals rand.next int, and you pass in the maximum. So the max would be like the length of the list. I think it's called list.size. Okay. So again, like all this, I'm basically just writing Java code with like a minimal translation to Kotlin. Then that index has the random word that I want to show. So maybe I'll say val word equals list. In Java you say list.get, and then you can pass in an index. I think it's true in Kotlin you can just say list bracket index, and it'll work. It's always a litmus test for me. Like, is it possible to access things using brackets or something, or do you have to call some stupid method to get the elements out? That's always my test of whether a language is expressive or not. Anyway, so you can pull the words out, and then maybe that's the word that I'll set here in this the word, right? So it'll pick that word when it first loads up. So I guess maybe I'll comment this and say pick a random word. And of course, where we're going to get in a minute is that instead of this fixed list of things, we'll pull a list out of a file or something instead, right? Now, okay, that's not the most interesting part here. I think the interesting thing is we want to pick random definitions for the word. So how do you pick random definitions? Well, let's imagine again that we have like random array list of definitions. So let's call this definitions, and then instead of hello, you might say like a greeting, something you say when you are done talking. Marty is a dude. Whatever. You could just add some other definitions here, like another name for a duck, the president, nothing at all. You could just have some different definitions here, and you might say, I want to extract out some number of elements from that list, and I want all those elements to appear on the screen in a list view. So if I want, let's say I want 4 random elements from this list. What's a good way to do that? To just pull out 4 of the strings from the array list. What do you think? Don't worry about Kotlin specific stuff here. Just like how would you do that in general? Any ideas?
Can you just generalize what you did before?
Just do kind of similar thing here. Just like pull a random element out. Yeah, you mean do it like in a loop n times or something like that. The main problem with that, I think that would work, except I really don't want a duplicate. I don't want to accidentally pick like the president twice, like the less said about him the better, right? So I don't want to pick it twice. So like, what do we do to make sure that we always get unique ones? I could make it be a set and put it into a set, and then while the set's not big enough. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this. My suggestion would just be, if you jumble up the list and then take the first n elements, you're done, basically. So I think, like, there's a lot of different ways to get this done. I don't know, does Kotlin add, if you say defens dot, is there a shuffle method? There is. Okay, so I could say shuffle. There's not a shuffle method in Java, but they like add it to the array list for Kotlin, I guess. But if I said shuffle, and then basically I want the first 4, so I think you could say defens dot sub list. You could say like, from 0 to 4 or something like that. That like slices out a sublist of there. So you could say something like for each defen that's in there, I want to do something. You know what I mean? For each definition that's in the first 4, I want to do that. Okay, so like I'm just trying to show you kind of what you could do to play with lists and stuff in Kotlin. Now, this isn't the only way that you can do lists in Kotlin. In my actual Kotlin slides, I guess I'll jump there for a second. I didn't talk very much about collections, so let me jump to that real quick. This is code to do an array, why is it there? To do an array and an array list in Java at the top. And in Kotlin, they have these convenience function called list of or mutable list of. So I want to talk about mutability again for a second. You know this word mutable? It means like modifiable, changeable, something like that. And Kotlin distinguishes between constant collections and collections that can be modified. Now, I don't know. I'm not as interested in that. Like the people who designed the language, they've clearly sliced off certain things that are important to them, like this val versus var is a variable that could change versus one that can't, right? Var can change. And also they do this with collections. And if you're curious, like why do they care about that so much? Why are they so concerned with something, whether something can be changed or can't be changed? I think it has to do with like there's certain kinds of algorithms that you can optimize more if you know the variable is constant. You don't have to worry about, like especially if you parallel algorithms and threads and stuff, if things are constant, it makes it easier to reason about. But anyway, if you just want to make a list of stuff, you can say list of and just write the elements in parentheses. If it's never going to change, that's fine. But if it is potentially going to change, you can say mutable list of. And now the mutable list allows you to say like add, but the regular list of doesn't. So whatever. So I could have said over here, I could have said list of and then written all those elements in there instead, just so you know. Okay, so that's kind of how lists work. Or like I said, you can, like my code in Kotlin, I didn't do this. I basically wrote the code similar to that. I made an array list and I put elements in it. So that's kind of interesting because Kotlin, in the code that I just wrote a minute ago, Kotlin is actually using the Java ArrayList object. And so you can kind of see there that Kotlin and Java can sort of seamlessly talk to each other. And in fact, the random number generator I'm using is also the Java random number generator. So I guess I'm just saying if you know Java, everything you do in Java you can do here. You have to do it with Kotlin syntax, but all those objects are still there, and they still have the same methods that you would remember them having. So, when I said for this class that it's helpful to know Java, it's not required, I think that's the way in which that it's helpful, because just the stuff you remember, like ArrayList or hash map or how strings work or whatever, a lot of that is still here. It still works, So anyway, I make a list, I randomly pick some elements, and now for some subset of them, the first 4 of them, I'm going to put those into the list view. So that goes back to my list slides where I said that I needed this adapter. So there's different kind of adapters. I think you might say, Marty said that this wasn't designed very well, he doesn't like it very much or whatever. So why did they do it this way? Like, why isn't it better or more to Marty's liking? I guess the reason they're doing this is because there's different places the data could be coming from for your list view. It could be coming from just a file in your app. It could be coming from, like, you have an internal database on your phone. A database would be like a giant collection of rows and columns that's like a little bit like a data structure on steroids. You could pull data from that. You could be connecting to some website or web service or some other app or some kind of Wi-Fi thing to get the data. So I think they provided this kind of adapter thing to provide different sources that data could come from. So I'm going to say I want an array adapter, which means my data comes from an array or from an array list. And when you make an array adapter, you have to pass 3 parameters to it. You have to tell it what activity is going to use the adapter. Now, the activity is like our code that we are writing. And so if we want to refer to ourselves, to our own code, we write the word this here, which means this object, this activity. You have to write what layout we're going to use to draw the individual list items on the screen. That's weird. We haven't talked about that yet. But it's sort of like, I don't want to think about that, so I just want the default something for that. The default for that is called android.r.layout.simple_list_item1. What the hell? What is this? But if you just write that, it'll use the default look for each list item. And then third, you have to write the array or the array list of the items you want to appear. Now again, I hate this. I really think the only parameter you should have passed is that thing. I should pass that. That's what I want, but it makes you pass this other stuff too. Oh well, whatever. Once you do this once, you just sort of learn to copy and paste it and put it into your code. So let's make this adapter so that we can put this thing on the screen. So down here, I'm going to say val adapter equals array adapter of bracket string. So I have to say string here. And then those 3 parameters. So first is the activity, which is like this activity. Second is the layout. And the layout is called android.r.simple_list_item1. There's also a simple list item 2. I don't know what the difference is. If you really want to, we could try it in a second. So, and then the third thing we pass is the list. So defens. I guess actually that would do the whole list. So maybe I'll do that first, so we can play with that before we try the subset of 4 or something like that. Okay. So just creating that adapter is not enough. That doesn't cause anything to happen on the screen yet. We have to tell the ListView widget to pull its data from that adapter. So the way you do that, I believe, is you say the name of your list, which comes from the ID, which I think we called it what? We called it definitions list. So you say definitions list dot adapter equals adapter. Like set it to be that variable that we created. If you're confused by the name, I could call this my adapter, and then this would say, my adapter, right? Okay. So I think that's all we need to do. Let me run this real quick, and we can all go get a coffee while it compiles. I already got one, so I'll just drink it. Does your emulator run the same speed as mine, or faster, or slower, or what? Slower. What platform are you on? Mac. Well, there you go. How do you feel about your life choices now? Can't help you with that one. Yeah, it's kind of slow, huh? I have seen this. The other times I've taught this course, I forget if I told you guys this. I've seen a lot of students, when I help them in office hours or something. They run their program and their emulator boots up. There it is. Their emulator boots up, and they look at it and they go, okay. And then they close the entire emulator, and then they go back here and they work on it some more, and then they click run, and it boots up the whole emulator again. And it's like, no, don't do that. Just leave it running, right? you test it, and then if it's not right, you go back to Android Studio and work on it some more, and then you run it again. But don't close this. Leave it open the whole time you're working. Otherwise, you have a really long round trip between editing the code and testing the code. So, okay, hey, look, this is pretty much working, right? It's showing all the words. It has all the different definitions that we picked, but they're shuffled up, I think, right? That's not the same order as I declared them. So a lot of the stuff we're doing here seems to be working. Okay, great. Now, I think I said the whole point of this was so that the thing could be dynamic, right? So where's the dynamism here? Let me go back to the slides and show you a little bit more, and we'll kind of get to that. So yeah, here's an example. It's basically the same example that we talked about, just with different elements in it. That's fine. So if you make changes, what you would do is maybe the array list that you're dealing with, you remove or add some elements from it or whatever. That is going to cause your adapter to have new data. You have to call a method on the adapter named .notify data set changed. Why do you have to call that? Well, I think the idea is like when you call that method, it's going to tell the list view that there was a change, and then the list view is going to redraw itself on the screen. You might say, well, why doesn't it just automatically redraw itself when I change the array list? I think the reason for that is because it's kind of hard for it to like watch the array list and notice if it changes, so you just sort of tell it when it has changed. But anyway, you have to do this. If you don't do it, you won't see the change appear on the screen. So I think a more realistic example would be like we have some sort of event that causes a change to the array list, and that causes this notification to occur. So let's do an additional widget on the screen. Like, well, actually, I don't think we actually need another widget. Maybe what we'll do is, remember the whole point here is we pop up the word and we pop up the definitions, and you're supposed to click the one that you think is the right one, and we're going to see if you got it right or got it wrong. So maybe we'll make it so that when you tap on the definitions, this change will occur, right? How do I make something happen when you tap on the definitions? How do I do that? Do you remember? Well, when we were dealing with buttons and stuff, we could say on click, right? We went to the XML and we said on click. That doesn't work here for this widget. On Tuesday, I talked about how you have to do something different for a list. Do you remember what you have to do to listen to events on a list?
Set on item click listener.
Yes, in the Kotlin code, you need to say that you're going to set a listener for clicking of items. Yeah, so down here somewhere, and by the way, sometimes it's hard to see because you don't get to see the whole file on the screen here. So like where I am in the code right here is all of this code I've been writing is within the function onCreate. So when the app loads up, of course, if I'm going to get good style points from these picky CAs, probably I should do like private fun set up list or something, and then here I should say set up list. I don't know, maybe I call this method more than once or something like that. I also, in addition to setting up the list, I want to listen to the event of clicking, like you said. So I'll say, what is it called, definitions list dot set on item click listener. And remember this weird syntax I showed you where you just put the code that you want to run in the brackets? And so if you've forgotten exactly how that should look, I have the slide for that. Where is that? Here, you say set on item click listener, and then in brackets, you write what's called an anonymous function or a lambda function, and it declares 4 parameters, and then an arrow, and then the code you want to run. And the 4 parameters are the list, the specific item that they clicked on, the index of that item, and its ID if it has like in the XML if it had an ID. So that's the syntax for this. One thing about these lambda functions is the syntax for them in general is bracket, parameter, 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 arrow, code. There is a little bit of simplified syntax, like if the lambda function doesn't take any parameters, like if it's just a void function, you just write brackets with code. You can also do the just brackets with code syntax if the lambda function accepts 1 parameter, because it will implicitly call that parameter it. I don't know. So, but anyway, if you take 4 parameters like you have to do here, you need to write them all out. However, I think I showed you last time that if you're not using some of the parameters, you can just write an underscore And you don't even have to give the parameter a name. In fact, if you do give the parameter a name, Android Studio gets angry and says you could have made this an underscore. So yeah, so if I want to know something about what item you clicked on, I can write the syntax a little bit like this. So I'll say set a listener that takes something and the index you clicked on and then something, and then writes some code, right? So now what I think we said was, I guess I wanted to make it so that when you tapped on it, maybe it would change the contents of the list so that we could see that change on the screen. So how about just something really simple? Let's make it so that it deletes the element you tap on. Okay, what if we want to do that? Do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, how do you get the listings we make for this view in XML?
How did I get it so that I could use the?
You're listening to the list that you've made.
I'm not sure if I understand. Like this variable here is because in the XML I gave it an ID of definitions list, and Kotlin allows you to refer to the widgets by their IDs as if those IDs were variables. And so if you're trying to do this in your Android Studio, like whatever, give this a descriptive name, and then you go to the Kotlin and you start typing that name, and as you start to type it, it suggests it as auto-completion, and you say, yes, I want that one. And it'll kind of wire up these sort of extensions. Like this, I never declared this variable. It just makes a magical variable based on the ID that I gave the widget in the XML file. Okay? So if I want to delete the item that got clicked on, you might imagine something like, well, okay, I have this index, so why don't I say, hey, definitions list dot remove that index, something like that, right? That's kind of what you might picture. But that would make way too much sense for Android development, so no, that's not what you do. Instead, the list takes all of its cues from this adapter that it's reading its data from. So if you want the list on the screen to change, you have to modify the adapter. And if you want to modify the adapter, you have to modify the array list that you pass to the adapter. So like, you don't want to talk to the widget, you want to talk to the underlying data to make a change here. So if I want to modify that list was called defens, right? We use this list of definitions, and we pass that list of definitions to this adapter, and then we pass the adapter to the widget. So if I talk about defens up here, if I say like defens.remove index, it doesn't understand that, right? What's going on? What's the problem? It's not in scope. I declared it in a totally different function. Oh no, what should I do? Yeah, I need it in more than one function, so let's pull it up, pull it out, make an instance variable, make a field out of it. So let's go private val defens equals array list of strings. There. And then down here when I play with defens, I don't have to say the creation of it anymore, I just put stuff in it, right? Okay, so now defens is declared as a sort of private variable everybody can see. And now here, I guess remove index doesn't work. If I'm remembering correctly, remove, they call it remove at. So I thought in Java it was just called remove, but anyway, whatever. Some of the Kotlin stuff renames some of the method, but anyway, you remove the element at that index. So let's give it a try. Now, I think I'm forgetting something. If I remove that from that array list, I think it's not going to, show the change on the screen yet. Do you know what I forgot? Yeah? Yeah, I forgot this stupid notify thing, wherever that is, right? Where? Here. I didn't do this yet. So I have to say it's a little bit annoying. Like when you're a new Android developer, you get almost everything right, and then you tap it and nothing happens. And so, it's hard to find bugs like that. You basically just need the CA or the teacher or somebody else to give you another pair of eyes and say, you forgot that weird notify thing, right? Okay, so the notify method is a method that's on the adapter. So the adapter, if I say like my adapter.notify, again, adapter's not found in this scope, so down here, when I have my adapter equals whatever, I need to pull this up here, private val my adapter equals that. Okay? So now I think I could say my adapter dot notify data set changed. So I think that will make it so that when I tap on the definitions, they go away. That's not what we actually want to do, but I would want to test if the list can change dynamically while the code is running. That's the point. So let's see if it does that. So my wife and I are rewatching all the Spider-Man movies because, we like Spider-Man, and we have this big argument about which one's the best one. Like, I'm hardcore Spider-Man 2, Doc Ock, Raimi version from, what is it, 04, something like that? And she's really writing from this Homecoming movie that came out a couple of years ago. And I'm just like, no, that's objectively wrong, right? I mean, because Aunt May is not supposed to be sexy Marissa Tomei. That's just not right? Uh-oh. Dictionary keeps stopping. Oh, interesting. Wow. See, compile time is story time. But, okay, wait, let's back to this for a second. I got a crash. I haven't had a crash yet. I'm so excited by this. This is great. What a great opportunity we have to celebrate failure. I just haven't talked that much about crashes. Now, when you coded in 106 or something and you had a crash, you'd get like a stack trace, an error message, right? But your app keeps stopping. Okay, well, close. So how the heck am I supposed to know what's going on here? I knew we would get at least one crash today, so I wanted to talk about it with you guys. There is a stack trace. It just doesn't pop up on the screen for you to see. Any ideas, like why doesn't the app pop up a stack trace on the screen? I mean, it's intentional. They could have, and they chose not to. Why do you think they didn't?
Because it looks horrible.
It looks horrible? Are you saying my code is horrible? Yeah, no, let's explore that. What do you mean by that? Like, it looks horrible to whom?
Like the user of the phone.
Yeah, I mean, the person who sees that popping up is probably not going to be me. It's going to be the person who downloaded my app. They don't know what a java.lang.runtime exception is or whatever, so it's not very helpful to them. It just confuses them. All they need to know is that the app stopped or something, right? So it doesn't pop up. We have a very developer-focused mindset because we're developers, right? But this operating system and these apps are for users, and the users don't want to see the details of a lot of these messages. So it doesn't show it. Of course, it does show it, just not on the phone screen. If you look down here at the bottom of your Android Studio, there's these different tabs, and right now it's on a tab called Build that like shows the progress of compiling and running the app. But I think it's over here when you click Run.
Okay.
Is that where it is? Wait, or is it Logcat? I get confused a little bit here. There's different tabs of things that pop up, and I think Logcat is the one I want. I sometimes forget which one's which. If I scroll up, where is it? There should be an error somewhere. I want to talk about debugging and errors for a second, but on fatal error from engine. I was hoping to get a more descriptive message than this. No, I thought I would get a stack trace somewhere. Is it here? Okay, wait. Could not find drawable icon from resource. Okay, I guess I'm not. I thought I would see something a little more helpful than this in here. Oh, here it is. Here it is. I just didn't scroll up enough.
Main activity 11.
What's that?
Like right, just a few lines down going main activity 11.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking. So here's the thing. I want to talk about this. As general. I mean, I want to fix this bug. I know what the bug is, but I also want to like talk to you guys. Like, you are going to have bugs, and I want you to know how to like hunt them down and squish them, right? Because it's hard. So in this Logcat tab, it's kind of like a console and printing out all these messages from your app. And again, it doesn't show on the emulator screen, but it shows for you, the developer. And the problem with this thing is it just spam dumps a bunch of messages in there. Like, as the app is running, it prints like little debugging messages that the authors of Android dump into there. And so you can get really overwhelmed by all that stuff. And so there's a couple things that you can do. One thing is up here at the top of this thing, it has these different drop-down boxes, and there's different types of messages you can listen to. So I really think you want to set it that you only want to show error messages. So that filters out a lot of those other debugging messages that Android is printing out or whatever. So then once it switches to errors only, now that filters it down a lot. Now you want to scroll up and down and look for something that looks like an exception stack trace. And in particular, as you said, you want to try to find things that maybe came from your code, like mainActivity.kt. That's me. I want to figure out what line of my program is wrong. So this is, I need this stack to help me do that, right? So it says main activity line 11, and if I click it, it jumps there. So I don't think you would necessarily know this as a new Android programmer, but one thing that often leads to bugs is if you try to do something too soon, you have to think about when code runs. So these private variables, they get created and initialized at the instant your activity gets constructed, the object for your activity gets constructed. After your activity gets constructed, it runs this onCreate method that actually lays out all the widgets on the screen and stuff like that. So I think what's going on here is there's a lot of stuff that you cannot successfully do until your app has actually finished loading up and put all the widgets on the screen. Like this business about creating this adapter, it used to work. Remember that? And now it's crashing. That's because it used to be that code was running down here somewhere. But now instead it's running up here before the thing has even really initialized itself. So this code is running too early. Now this error message down here is not super helpful to identify that. However, if you really have an eagle eye, it is telling you that. It says, hey, your system services are not available to an activity before the onCreate method gets called. Now, I spy that within all this mess of other stuff, so I forgive you if you didn't notice that. But that's kind of what's going on here, okay? So, what can we do? Well, we could declare this up here as a private variable, private field, member variable, and then we could set its value later after the app has created itself. That would basically solve the problem. Yeah, question?
So the issue is when you pass this, because this doesn't exist?
I want to be honest with you that I don't totally know exactly what's going on, but I think the idea is that this adapter wants to refer to this activity a little bit, and it wants to use some of this layout stuff to figure out how to draw the list items, and it sort of wants to talk to Android, and it wants to talk to our activity, and it wants to talk to layouts. And I think until our app has kind of created itself, the app's not ready to talk in that way. And so, I don't totally understand why exactly it doesn't work, but it's too early to be making adapters before the activity has even loaded up, I guess is the way to think of it.
When you pass in an empty array list as an adapter, and then later you set the adapter, but you don't do notify data set change, will it just have an empty?
Yeah, you're right. This is actually two bugs in one. It's just that the second one is non-obvious, which is that at this point, the way the code is currently written, I create the adapter with an empty list of definitions because we just created the list of definitions. We haven't added anything to it yet. And then, now it's empty and it doesn't notice the change when we add the elements to it later. So that's also, basically there's two bugs here. We just identified one that was so bad of a bug that it was crashing the entire app. You're totally right that even if we fix that, we also have to be careful about this other thing that don't create the adapter until the list has the contents in it. Yeah, so I think fixing the first bug will also fix your subtler second bug. So I think what you want to do is you sort of want to copy this and yoink this and pull this down here. You sort of don't want to initialize this yet, and then down here, where is it? Oops, trying to get rid of that doodling there. Sort of after you make the list, then you sort of want to say adapter equals that, that's kind of what you want to do. Then I think that'll also solve your question, right? However, we're kind of tripping over some Kotlin stuff now, because it says val cannot be reassigned. Because up here, if you say this is a val, it's sort of val meaning you assign its value once and then you never change it ever again, right? So you sort of go, okay, well then I'll make it a var because vars can change, but I have to set it to something here. Do I set it to null? And so I think this just leads to a cascade of confusion here where I haven't talked about some of these issues. Look what this says, type required, nothing, question mark, found, array adapter. So Kotlin also is a little bit persnickety about nullness. You guys know about null, right? What's null? What does it mean? Something to be null. I mean, I know that you know, I just sort of want to hear you articulate. What do you think of as null? Yeah.
Just having no value assigned?
It's like an object, but it doesn't have a value assigned to it. There's sort of a lack of an object, right? Null is an interesting thing. You probably take null for granted because if you learn Java, you have null. If you learn Python, they have something called none. If you learn JavaScript, there's a null. If you learn C++, there's null pointers and so on. It probably never occurred to you that you shouldn't necessarily have to put up with such a creature. Null has been called the billion-dollar mistake, I think. Null, there's all sorts of bugs that come about because there is such a thing as null. Null is weird. If you have an object variable that's null and you try to call a method on that variable, what will happen? It crashes. It says null pointer exception. If you're doing C++ and you have a pointer and its value is null and you try to follow that pointer, what happens to that? You get a segmentation fault, you crash. Null is bad, right? Null is scary. So you might have just accepted this, like, well, null's tricky, better be careful, better watch out. But it's possible to not have null. Like if you have an int or a double or something, those typically cannot be null, right? Like wouldn't it be shitty if ints could be null? And then every time you had an int, you have to check if the stupid int was null. You just don't do that when you're dealing with ints, and isn't it delightful, right? So the designers of Kotlin, and actually lots of more modern programming languages, have tried to like reduce the impact of nullness on programming. And one way that they do that, I'm going to jump to my Kotlin slides for a second. Now, where is my slide on this? Here. So here's some code that deals with the possibility of nullness in Java up there. You have a string. If strings are objects, it could be null. Oops, if you call .length on that variable, that would crash. Oops. Okay, well, you could say if it's not null, then I'll get the length of it. That's fine. That's pretty typical code, right? In Kotlin, if you say, I want to make this variable that's a string, you aren't allowed to set it to null. It's like, no, null is not a string. If you want a variable that could be a string or a null, you have to set it to a string, or as I call it, the California string. It's like a string, you know? You can throw a string in it, or it could be null. It's a string. It's like that. So, but this is interesting. This is like, I guess I would call this a nullable string. It's an optional string. It's a string or a null. So, anyway, if you make a variable that is of type string without question mark, it cannot be assigned null. You can be certain in all of your code that it will never be null. And you can also be certain that if you ever call any methods on that variable, you will not get a null pointer exception. This is enforced by the compiler. Any code that violates this won't compile, so you can assume it's okay. If you have an object that is the optional sort of nullable version of the data type, then it could be null. Therefore, whenever you try to call methods on the variable, now it gives you an error. It gives you a compiler error because it says, I'm too scared to call this method because that variable could be null, and I don't want to let you crash your code like that. That's so dangerous. So it won't allow that. So if you want to call the method, you have to say California name.length. And this question mark dot means if it isn't null, then please call .length on it. So like it's sort of a conditional method call. If it is null, it won't call the method. If it isn't null, it will call the method. But then you have to put this weird thing here that's like, well, but if it was null, then just set it to 0 or something like that. So anyway, they have these weird syntaxes and weird operators that could be used on these nullable variables. This piece of code here also is okay if you explicitly have a test for null. And then inside of that, you write some code. It will allow you to call the methods because it's able to tell that you already checked for null, and you can't be in here if it was null. Therefore, I will allow you to say .length without the question mark. So it's kind of interesting. Like these little features basically make it so that at almost every place in your code, you just don't have to think about the possibility of nullness, and it actually eliminates a lot of different kinds of bugs. And if you look at the code, like a method that takes a parameter. Look how this says saved state bundle question mark. That means it takes a bundle, but the bundle could be null. And probably the reason they make it a question mark version like that is because this is supposed to be backward compatible with Java code, and the Java code might pass a null and so forth. But when we wrote event handlers, we took a parameter of type view, and we didn't put any question mark on it, which means that the view passed would never be negative. Somebody in the back had a question, but I ignored you for a while. Did I miss your question, or do you still have a question? No? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
If you declare type without, if you declare a variable without any type, what happens? Could you assign that to null? Or?
Oh, okay, right. So, is that door open? Can we shut the door?
Yeah, the door's open.
Yeah, so. They're just really into null pointers out there, I guess. So yeah, question is, if you don't say a type, what happens? Well, there is kind of a general type called object that you can use, and there's also a type called nothing, which is a little bit weird. Normally, if you don't say anything about a type, the type will be inferred or deduced from the code around it. So if you use some kind of value there, it'll say, oh, you're using an int, but you didn't say what type, so I'm going to assume that the type is int. If you don't say the type and you don't say any value, it actually doesn't really know what to do with that. So like if you look here, if I say my var my adapter, it doesn't understand because it says like, I don't know what this is. Like you didn't give me a type or a value, so I don't know what to do here. So there's a couple things you can do. One thing you could do is you could set it equal to, if you say a variable is equal to some array adapter, you either have to, like, I guess my point was you have to put some kind of value here, right? And you could set it to some dummy value, and then later you could change it to something else. But then it's kind of unclear, like, what do I write here? Like, what's like a temporary value for an array adapter? There's another thing you can do where you can say, well, the type of this is an array adapter of strings, but like, as opposed to this, where you're setting it equal to a new array list, this could be like, I don't want to set its value yet. There's a keyword called late init. Late init means like, I will set this thing's value later. And then it lets you do it. Why does it make you say that? Well, I don't know. Kotlin is kind of weird. But the point at which I initialize it now is down here. So that all kind of works. And in fact, I think it's true that I can say late init val. Val, you can only set it once, right? I'm pretty sure. Oh, is that wrong? Late init is only allowed. Oh, maybe that's wrong. No, I'm wrong. Okay, because I thought since I was only setting it once, it would be okay. But it makes me say var. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Some of this is just like Kotlin weeds, getting stuck in the weeds of Kotlin here. But now down here, I set the adapter, and so it all should work. It'll run the way that it ran before. So I think the whole point of all this was I wanted to be able to tap on the list items and have them, disappear as I tapped on them. And so it didn't work before. We tweaked the code. Let's see. Another name for a duck. I tap on that. It's gone. Yay, it worked. So it only took us most of an hour to get a tappable list that disappeared. But these are dynamic lists that come from somewhere, lists whose contents change while the app is running. It's a little harder than just declaring an array of strings in an XML file. Any other questions so far?
I'm a little confused with val being constant, because if we make a constant array list, we're still allowed to even take things out of it.
Yeah, that's a good question. Val, how const is a val? So like, where's my list? Here. So if you want a list whose elements cannot change, you could do that by saying list of instead of saying mutable list of. If you make an array list, Java style, array lists are implicitly mutable. So what does it mean to say val if you set it to be an array list? It seems like the val implies constantness, and the array list isn't constant. So like, there's a mismatch between those two things. Well, I think there's a difference of like, how objects are references, right? Like if you have a list with like 4 elements in it, you can have a variable named like A that's equal to that list, and then you can make another variable B, and if you set it equal to that list, they're both like kind of pointers, they're both referring to the same list, and then if you set the value of one of them, the other one will also see the change. Saying something saying that a variable is a val versus a var, What that really means is you're not allowed to make it refer to any other list in the future. So like if I make some other list over here with different amount of elements in it, and then I try to say A should be equal to that list, in general that would mean that A points up here. It doesn't modify this list, it doesn't modify B, it just modifies the list that A is referring to. It won't allow you to do this if A is declared as a val. But if B is declared as a var and you want to assign him equal to that list, B will now point to that list and that will work. So that's kind of what amount of constantness is meant by val and var. However, if you really do want it so that like, I want this to be the list and I don't want anybody to change the contents of the list, then you have to say list of instead of mutable list of, and that's how you get like a constant list of elements. Okay? What's really confusing is if you have a var variable that points to a list of, the list is constant, but you could make the variable refer to some other constant list later. Whatever, right? Oh well. It's like, what's the analogy here? It's like val is like you're married and var is like you're just dating. But mutable list versus immutable list is like, is your partner capable of change over time? You know, it's like, can they become a better person or are they just who they are? That's kind of what's going on here. Yeah. My wife thinks I'm a mutable list, but no, that's me right there. All my flaws are here to stay. So anyway, you know, list. Any other questions about this stuff we were coding here? The adapter. I mean, I'm going to make you guys write homework 2 that has a list, and you need to change it while the app is running. And so I just want to make sure you guys sort of see the pieces here. Any other questions?
What is that for loop for that you wrote out there?
Oh, right. So I was going to make it just restrict to the first 4 elements, the first 4 definitions. But I think I'll do that in a minute because I want to read data from a file. So I kind of didn't do that part yet, but we will. Anything else? Okay, well, let's do files. I want to make sure we finish that. So let's go to files and storage. I don't have a ton to say about this topic. So actually, like, I don't think it's a bad thing that we don't have a ton of minutes left. But files, I mean, you guys probably read data from files in other classes like 106B or something like that. You know, data is interesting. Most interesting apps process data. I will say that most data processed by mobile apps usually comes from some external place. It comes from a website or a feed of data or a query of a data set, database, something like that. But like sometimes you do want to read from a file. Now, you can store things in different places. You know, if you're reading from the internet or something that comes externally from your device, or it could just be like something that's located on your device, but even if it's located on the device, it could be located in different places. Apps have this notion of what's called internal storage. Internal storage is like inside of your app, you can put resources and files and you could read them. You can also make little internal files that you modify and write and change and stuff like that. It's called internal because only your app can ever see that or touch it or modify it or anything. So like if I have some other app on my same phone, that app is not able to read in the data that I've made internally inside of this app. So that's good. I mean, if you think of files like you have your computer, you have your directories and your file system, like Android does have that, but like each app has this little private lockbox area called internal storage. That way, I mean, this is really important for security. Like if you have passwords or secret stuff, you don't want to have to think about other apps like scrolling through your files and reading them and stuff. So internal storage, just for you, just for your app, it's private. There's also external storage, which is used by every app. It's a shared space. So, you know, if nothing else, the kind of stuff that you would find there would be like if you have any songs, any, you know, MP3s or music on your phone, that would be an external storage. Any app could sort of look at that if they wanted to. Any photos that you took, downloads, you know, that kind of stuff. Now, there is a permission system where the app can ask to access these things, and I'm going to talk about that in a later lecture, but those are things that would be shared across multiple apps, potentially. What's unfortunate is if you Google about this thing, what internal storage, external storage, there's a lot of websites that have an outdated terminology here. It used to be that internal storage was like a disk of memory that was inside your phone built in. External storage was like if you bought a little SD card and plugged in extra storage in there, that was your external storage. That's not how they describe the separation between these two things anymore. That's not the distinction. In fact, both a SD card or the built-in memory could be either of these things. So that's just the kind of the distinction. Like normally if you talk about internal drive or external drive, you're talking about is it inside the computer or is it plugged in by USB or SD or something like that, but that's not what this means here. Okay, so if you want to use internal storage, if you want to read files from the internal storage, which is what we're going to do in a second, you have to put them in your project in a folder called res/raw. So we put images in a folder called res/drawable last time. And raw is just another subdirectory within res. It's a different type of resource. So I'll show you that now. I've got a folder here. So if I had a file called like GRE words, if I want to put that in a project that we're working on today, I go to my Android Studio projects folder or wherever I created my project. We made a project called dictionary, so I go in there. I go in the app, the source, the main, the res, and then there's all these folders in here. And now it doesn't have a raw folder, so I have to create a new folder called raw and paste it in there. So I know I went really fast, but I will, on the specs of the homeworks and stuff, I'll remind you what folder to use and stuff. But you have to put your file in a certain folder. Once you put it there, it should be seen by your project. In the sidebar here, there's a res. And so I think if I open this up under raw, it should have that file. So that file consists of lines that have a word and then a tab and then a definition for the word. I don't remember where I got this from, but these definitions maybe aren't even that good. They don't have parts of speech or anything, but whatever. Now the app knows about the file. So that's where you put it. That's where you locate the file within your project. And then when you build the project and deploy it out onto the emulator, this file will just be packed in there, and you can open it up and read it if you want to. So the way that you read it, I'm not going to talk about external storage. I'll come back to external storage next time. But if you want to read a file, there's several different ways to do it. If you've already done Java, like 106A, like maybe you used, what kind of object did you use to read data in Java? Yeah?
Buffered reader.
Buffered reader, that's pretty popular. I sometimes teach another one called scanner. There's a couple different objects you can use. Good news is this is Kotlin, so you can use those exact objects if you want to. Here I'm talking about some of the sort of underlying fundamental objects. There's an object for files. There's also these like streams. Bytes flow in and out of sources and targets of data in these stream objects that sort of send a byte at a time. You don't normally interact with streams directly, but usually wrap streams up with a reader of some kind. So I'm going to show you an example. I think the best way to learn how to read a file is by example. Usually you use one of these two objects. You use something called a buffered reader. Buffered reader has a method for reading a line, and it has a method called ready, which tells you if there's another line ready to be read. There's another thing called scanner. I like scanner better because scanner not only allows you to read lines, but you can also say read the next int or the next double, and so you can read data in token form instead of in line form, but it's up to you. You can do what you like. So if you want to do it in Kotlin, these are methods that are built into every Android activity. So like your code that you're already writing, your object that you're in has these methods. It has a method called openFileInput. It has a method called openRawResource. Those both work. It also has a couple of directories you can use for things. So that's kind of all you need to get started. When you call these methods, they usually return you this like stream value as the return value, but then you can pass that as a parameter to a buffered reader or a scanner, and then the scanner will pull the data out from that place. So let me show you an example real quick. I want to read the GRE words file that we talked about. So over here, maybe I'll make another method called read dictionary file. Okay, and then in that method, fun read dictionary file. I bet this can be a cool private fun here. So if you want to open the file, it's called grewords.txt. So I think the best way to read this file is by using this first thing. You say resources.openRawResource, and you pass r.raw. and then the name of the file without the extension. So it's called grewords.txt. This thing returns an input stream. So you like buffered reader. So if I want a buffered reader, I can say like reader equals buffered reader. Oops, buffered reader. And I can pass that as the parameter. So that, like in Java, you'd say new buffered reader or whatever, but you don't say new in Kotlin. You just omit the word new. So now I've got a buffered reader. What, does that not work? Type mismatch. Oh, maybe I'll use scanner. Scanner's pretty cool. How about that? Does scanner let me do that? Okay, whatever. So I'll make a scanner. Wait, why does it not like that? It doesn't like my variable name. Oh, I didn't say val, right? Val reader. Okay, so you open up this scanner thing, and now you can just read lines from the file. You can just do something like while the reader dot has a next line. If you haven't used a scanner before, I think I have a slide that shows some of the methods. Like a scanner, you can say, does it have a next token or a double or an int or a line? And if it does, you can read a token or a double or an int or a line. So you can just say, while it has a next line, val line equals reader dot next line. So then you can do whatever you want with that line. What I want to do with these is I want to read them all in and maybe put some of them on the screen in my list view. But I do think this is a place where, I want to warn you guys, I think it's more likely that you'll succeed if you write your app a little bit at a time and test things to make sure that they're working, right? So what I would want to do if I were just coding this in any other setting is I would just want to sort of like print out each line, like println, just to see if it worked, So you can do that. I think the best way to do like the equivalent of println is there's something in Android called logging messages. Now remember that thing a minute ago where we had that crash that appeared down at the bottom? You can do something similar to that. There's a printing, I taught you that there's a println statement in Android, but that's not typically how people send output like to a console. What you do instead is there's a class called log, and it has methods that are one-letter names, and those names indicate what kind of message you want to print out. There's like D for a debugging message, there's E for an error message, there's W for a warning message, there's even one called WTF for something you don't know what the heck is going on. That's kind of funny. In fact, they say it stands for what a terrible failure. Yeah, right. Sure it does. Sure it does. It's like my mom doesn't understand internet lingo, so she kept sending me texts that would end with like lol, mom, lol, and I'm like, what are you laughing at, And then I asked her, and she goes, oh, I thought it stood for lots of love. I was like, oh, Mom, you're so sweet, but what a terrible failure you've made, Mom. So anyway, this is probably just some debugging message, so I just say like log.d. Log.d takes two parameters. You pass in the the line is :line. So like the line that you're printing, I have to hit Alt-Enter to import this. But you pass the message you're printing, but in front of it, you're supposed to write another string, which is called a tag. And the tag is like a category of what this message is. So you can write anything you want, but I think the idea is if you pepper your code with these, you could search only for a certain tag, and it'll only show you the message that printed with that tag. I'll show you. I'll just call it like Marty or something. Tag Marty. The line is line. So the reason I'm doing this is I just want to run this only to make sure that it is reading this file successfully before I go any further, okay? So I hit run, and it's going to pop up. It doesn't show anything from the file here because I didn't do that yet, but over here in this logcat space, right now I'm showing error messages, but if I switch it to debug messages, and if I type in Marty, it's only going to show the ones that had that Marty filter on them. And as you might see, it is reading each line and printing it out. So like, I really encourage you to insert these logging statements in your code to test whether stuff is working, just as a sanity check. Otherwise, when it doesn't work, it's hard to track down why. Okay, so I'm reading each line. Now, we didn't really talk about like what do I want to do with these lines. Remember that the goal here is I want to pick a random word, and I want to pick like 4 or 5 random definitions, and I want to have the user try to guess which one's the right one, right? So I still need to do some plumbing to accomplish that. It's funny because like in theory one of the main topics for today is files, but I mean that's about it. You just need to know how to open the stupid thing, and then you read the lines and you do whatever you want with it, right? There's a little more to it than that. Help me with some of the rest of this. We have a few minutes left here. Like, what should I do with these lines if I want to actually write this game that we're talking about? Any suggestions? What do you think?
Could you make a map of definitions to
Make a map of like the word maps to the definition? Okay, sure. That sounds like a good idea. So something like up here, something like private val word to definition, which is a hash map of strings to strings, something like that. Hash map would be from Java. Okay. Great. And then down here, as I read each word, each line, the lines look like, you know, this. Vilify. And this is a tab here. Vilify, slander, say evil things. This isn't very like well punctuated, but whatever. So I think what you want is you want me to have the words map to their definitions, right? So if I want to split apart the two pieces, I think you could say line.split /t. And so that's going to yield two pieces. And then I could say word to definition dot put pieces 0 comma pieces 1, something like, right? Is that what you want? I think there's probably a little cleaner way to do this. I think you can say, instead of val pieces equals split, I think you can do something like word comma defen equals that or something. I forget how to say that. Is it like that? No? Do you know what I mean? Like you can pull apart the array into multiple variables. I actually don't remember the syntax. Oh, well, this is fine for now. So, yeah, question?
Don't you have to make the map a variable instead of val? Like
Make it available? What do you mean?
Like, why not make it val instead of val?
Oh, make it var because its contents change? Well, that's fine, but I think the val versus var just means can I point to a different map? This is fine. Yeah, this will be fine either way. So, I put the words and the definitions in there. So now, maybe we should revisit this code that that sets up the list, that picks a random word. Remember right now I'm like making a list and picking a random element for the list or something like that, right? And then down here I'm taking these definitions here. It just seems like that was a placeholder. Now I have real data that's up here. So I guess if you want me to, I could, you know, all these I could separately make a list of all the words. All words is an array list of strings. And then down here, as I read each line, I could say words.add pieces 0. So like all the words get thrown into a list. The reason you might want that is that sort of down here, when you're picking a random word, instead of all this, I could say, I could say get rid of this list that I just made up. And then instead of list.size, make it words.size. And then I could say pick words index. So like this is me picking a random element from that list of words, right? Okay. So now I want to pick 4 or 5 random definitions, one of which is the right one. So how do I do that? Well, I think maybe what I want to do is pick 5 random words and then look up all their definitions. Maybe something like defens.clear, defens.add, my word that I picked. I want to look up the word to definition of that word. So throw in the correct definition first. Slam. Found string question mark. Oh. Okay, I'll come to that in a second. But I want to throw in 4 other incorrect ones, right? So if I want to pick 4 other incorrect definitions, how do I get them? Well, I have this word to definition map, right? I also have a list called words. If I do words.shuffle, and then if I did for each other word in words.sublist 0 to 4, so this is like the first 4 words in there, I could do defens.add word to defen word, other word. Do you understand what I'm doing? I'm kind of just like throwing this together here kind of quickly, but I'm basically saying put the correct definition in, then put 4 other random words as definitions in, and then shuffle that up so they're in random order. Now this thing here says you have a string, but you need a string, but you have a California string. So it's mad because it thinks this might fail. So I think that you can put, don't you have to put, you put 2 exclamation marks to mean I insist it will be non-null. This is very non-Cal. This is like a New York, the question mark is the California, and this is the New York operator. Hey, I'm defining words here. Whatever. Yeah, question.
Isn't it possible you still get a duplicate definition?
It is possible. That's true. So could do that by, go ahead.
Couldn't you just say if it's equal to the word continue?
Sure. I could do something like 5, and I could say if other word equals word or defens.size is 5, then continue, or I don't know, something like that, right? Just like, I think that might work. So I put 5 things in there, I shuffle them up, I set the adapter to use them, and I tell it to use that adapter. So I think if I run this, I don't have a lot of minutes left, but I think if I run this, I'm going to get 5 random definitions. I hope. Is it working? Is it running? What's happening? Uh-oh. Exception, bounds must be positive in main activity line 47. Words.size, it doesn't like words.size. Oh, so I think the reason that this is crashing, words.size is not positive, that means it's 0. Why is the size 0? Well, I think it has to do with where this is getting called from. It's getting called before I read the dictionary file, so it's trying to like pick that stuff before there's anything to pick from. Let's try again. So, of course, I'm not going to fully finish this thing because I don't want to keep you late, but I think, no, come on, man. Read dictionary file. Put pieces 0, pieces 1. I think what I want to do is if pieces dot length size is at least 2, then I want to do this. I think there's a blank line in there somewhere. Let's see if this runs, and then we'll call it a day. The main thing I wanted to show you was how to use a file to inform the contents of the list. So I think it's working. Ubiquitous is one of those 5 things. I believe it's present everywhere. So the only piece missing would be when they click, I need to check if their index is the right one or the wrong one. So, all right, well, I'll post this code on the website. Homework 2 goes up later today. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.